500,000 Soviet soldiers, and Finland answered with a drink. Not a tank, not a plane. A glass bottle of petrol, mixed to a fixed recipe, bottled by the company that made the country's vodka, and named after the man on the radio who swore those weren't bombs falling on Helsinki. You know the name. Almost no one knows the Finns drew up the design months before the war, that one distillery turned out hundreds of thousands of them, or that the weapon mostly didn't do what the legend says. This is the real story of the Molotov cocktail. On the 30th of November 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Finland without declaring war. 4 days earlier, it had shelled its own border village at Mainila, fired the shells onto empty ground, then blamed the Finns. It wasn't even original. Soviet war games the year before had already rehearsed a staged border incident as the excuse to attack. The numbers said the fight could end only one way. 3.7 million Finns stood against a Soviet population of about 170 million, roughly 46 to 1. Finland fielded about 60 tanks, most of them obsolete, many without working guns. The Red Army came with more than 2,000. Moscow expected to be in Helsinki inside 2 weeks. The problem was those tanks. Finland had almost no anti-tank guns, and a rifle does nothing to armor. So a soldier in a snowbank, watching a steel hull grind toward him through the pines, needed something he could make and carry himself. While the Finns looked for that something, the bombers came for the cities. Soviet aircraft burned Helsinki, and the foreign minister, Vyacheslav Molotov, the man who months earlier had signed away Eastern Europe alongside Ribbentrop, told the world his planes weren't dropping bombs at all. They were dropping food. Bread, he said, for starving Finns. The Finns answered the lie with a joke. The cluster bombs that scattered fire across their neighborhoods became Molotov bread baskets, the baskets the promised bread arrived in. And the petrol bomb they were about to throw at his tanks became the Molotov cocktail, a drink to go with the meal. The contempt was real, even if the tidy chain from lie to name has been smoothed over in the 80 years since. But here is the first thing the legend gets wrong. The Finns didn't improvise this in a panic, and they didn't invent it either. Bottles of burning petrol had been thrown at Soviet-supplied tanks in the Spanish Civil War a few years earlier, in what is usually called the first large-scale use of the weapon against armor. And the tank they were thrown at in Spain was the same model now grinding into Finland, the T-26. The Finns weren't inventing anything. They were borrowing a trick already used on the very machine they now faced. What Finland did was engineer it. The work had begun back in 1937. A pioneer officer, Captain Eero Kuittinen, working with the engineer troops at the Korea garrison, spent 2 years refining a standardized firebomb, and by the spring of 1939, the design was finished. That August, months before the first shell fell, it was written into an official sapper manual. By the time the tanks rolled, Finland wasn't reaching for a desperate improvisation. It had a product, with a recipe and a spec. And the recipe was exact. A glass bottle, about half a liter, filled with petrol cut with ethanol and pine tar, anywhere from a fifth to a third of the mixed tar alone, because the tar made the fire cling to steel and threw up a wall of blinding black smoke. Taped to the side were 2 storm matches that burned for about a minute in any wind, so a man with frozen hands could strike and throw in one motion. There was even a self-igniting version, the A-Pullo, with a capsule of sulfuric acid that lit on impact, no match needed at all. They built around 1,500 of those. It all had to be delivered from almost on top of the tank because of how it actually worked. So picture 1 man, 1 bottle, 1 tank. He is 19, maybe 20, flat in a roadside ditch with snow packed against his chest, a storm match already burning against the glass. The tank grinds past, and for a moment the rear deck is turned toward him. He doesn't throw at the front. A bottle against the face of a tank is just a sheet of flame on steel that doesn't care. He throws for the back, where the engine pulls air through open vents to breathe. The fuel pours through those vents into the engine bay and sets the motor alight. The tank doesn't explode. It burns from the inside out. It worked because of what those early Soviet tanks were. The T-26 and the BT ran on gasoline, and they breathed through vents a man on foot could reach. Pour fire into that, and the whole engine bay caught. Mostly the smoke did the killing, pouring into the crew compartment until half-blinded men threw the hatches open and ran into the open snow. In the worst cases, the fire reached the shells stacked by the gun and cooked them off inside the hull. Later in the war, when the Soviets fielded diesel armor that didn't catch so easily, the bottle would lose much of its bite. But in the snow of 1939, against gasoline engines, it burned. And here is the second thing the legend gets wrong. The Molotov cocktail rarely killed a tank on its own. Most of the time, it finished armor already crippled by mines, by anti-tank guns, or by bundled charges the Finns called the kasapanos. It was the last tool in a hunting kit, and the kit had an order. First, the Finns peeled the infantry away from the armor, because a tank with no infantry around it is half blind. Then they stopped it, with a mine, or with the cruder trick of ramming a log or a crowbar into its tracks. Only then did a man close on the engine deck to finish it, working in teams that let the long Soviet columns push deep into the forest, trapped them in pockets the Finns called motti, and went in among the stalled tanks on foot. The Soviets learned fast and ringed their tanks with more infantry, so reaching the engine deck in daylight became close to suicide. By one Finnish account, the men on those tank killer teams suffered casualties of around 70%. The bottle was cheap. The men who threw it were not. Which is what makes the next part so strange. Finland didn't treat this homemade-looking weapon as a stopgap. It mass-produced it. The state liquor monopoly, Alko, turned its distillery at Rajamäki, the plant that made the nation's spirits, into a firebomb factory. It was the obvious choice because Alko already had the glass bottles, the alcohol, and the bottling lines. The first order, 40,000 bottles, was filled in 2 days. The first crates reached the front on the 4th of December 1939, days into the war. By New Year, the line had turned out 257,000. By spring, more than 540,000, bottled mostly by hand, the storm matches taped on and packed in the crate beside them. The Soviets noticed. They dropped more than 200 bombs on Rajamäki across 9 raids, and not one hit the line, which kept filling bottles under the guns of a Finnish anti-aircraft battery that fired back hundreds of rounds and claimed 2 bombers out of the sky. None of it was enough. After 105 days, on the 12th of March 1940, Finland signed a brutal peace. It gave up about 1/10 of its land, including Viipuri, one of its largest cities, and a sweep of Karelia that held much of its industry. More than 400,000 Karelians, roughly 1/8 of the whole country, left their homes for good. Finland lost around 25,900 dead. The Soviet dead ran far higher and are still argued over, from about 127,000 up into the range of 160,000. But Finland was never occupied, and it kept its independence. And the watching world drew a lesson from how badly the Red Army, its officer corps gutted by Stalin's own purges, had stumbled against so small an enemy. In Berlin, Hitler decided the Soviet giant was rotten, that it could be kicked in within a single season. He was wrong. In 1941, he tried anyway. So strip the legend away, and the Molotov cocktail is stranger than the story we tell about it. Not a desperate improvisation, but a weapon drawn up before the war. Not Finnish genius inventing fire in a bottle, but a name borrowed to mock a liar. Not the miracle that stopped the tanks, but the cheap last blow, thrown by men who mostly didn't live to throw a second. The Finns couldn't match the bombers, or the tanks, or the men. So they took the lie, bottled it, and threw it back. The name reached English newspapers within weeks, and it never left. Every petrol bomb thrown anywhere in the world since has carried the insult a handful of freezing Finns coined for the man who told them he was dropping bread. Today, almost no one remembers Vyacheslav Molotov for the treaties he signed. They remember him for a drink he never poured. If you want more of the war the giants would rather you forgot, stay with us.